Presenting Benny Goodman and
All right, everybody. Evening, Karen and Marie. Yeah, Benny might be a little loud. Hey, Luann. Hey, everybody, welcome along. Hey, Martin. If you're watching on YouTube, feel free to scroll ahead about 10 minutes. If you're watching on YouTube later, I should specify. Hey, Bridget and Mary Jo. Hey, Pat. Hey, Jeannie. Hey, Susan. YouTube and Facebook should come up at the same time, theoretically. Hey, Dory. Hey, Mary. Hey, Kristen. Hey, everybody. Welcome along. Hey, Emily. Hey, Timothy. Hey, Marita. Hey, Katie. Is Oliver twisting you? Well, here comes Miles. Ah. You wonder why you do this sometimes, Miles? You know how many people are watching you? And I get no privacy. Hey, Audrey. Hey, Susan, I'm loving this. I love this shirt. It's my newest formal wear shirt. Yeah, Richard's Fabulous Finds talked me into having this. Every time I go in there, something like, oh, that'd be fine for Elton John or something. I couldn't pull it off, and then I love it. Hey, Kathleen. Hey, everybody. Hey, Chris. Priya's back there. You can see her. Hey, Karen. Hey, Bala. Hey, everybody. Eleanor, glad you remembered.
Benny Goodman presents Helen Ward singing With All My Heart.
Hey, Joanne. Something going weird? People having to restart or something? I'd offer to help, but there's literally nothing I can do. Evening, Joanne. am drinking some Buffalo Trace this evening. Brought back from Ireland. Yes, I did. You know, Sullivan Gray, that's kind of the one thing about the numbers being much lower than they were 5 years ago. I don't get nearly as many really angry people asking me for tech support. Or accusing me of the whole thing being a scam. I'm not going to make as much not doing the tour, you know. Yeah, I hear a lot of people are having the annoying spinning wheel of death. Yeah, turn it off and turn it back on is all I can tell you. People would be like messaging me the specific device they're trying to use, like the specific make and model. Like, they don't give me a book here, I just work here. Hey Jim, over on YouTube. Well, you guys know, for the Instagram, I decided to climb back up the mountain this morning. And that time, I only probably rode for about 10-15 feet before I rolled off the sled. Hurt my elbow pretty good. But I was alright, clearly, here I am. Hell of it is, the Instagram kind of cut off the video. And I could still only climb up about halfway, it was so slippery. Hey Keely, glad you're here. Thanks, Karen. Yeah, it was last second Patty called me. So I hope the tour is actually ready. I think it is. I've been planning to spend the evening working on setting this up. Seems like it's buffering for everybody. Zuck must have fired a bunch of people or something. Doge got into the Facebook system. They would. It's doing things weird for you on YouTube. Oh, you might want to try the YouTube/Adam Selzer. Yeah, it's broadcasting at a reasonable rate. About the normal one. You might try switching to the Twitch, or... I know part of why you guys are here for the chat. Yeah, it's broadcasting at a normal rate. So somewhere in between me and Facebook, or some between me and you is Facebook. If the Facebook isn't working, best advice I can give is try YouTube. YouTube.com/Adam Selzer or Twitch.tv/Adam Chicago. Can I be consistent? No. No, I cannot. Hey, Debbie. That's definitely Pullman. I was just mentioning Pullman on the radio. Uh-huh.
And they all loved it. They all loved those bastards when they played by Benny Goodman. And now another one just in the same vein, Rosetta.
We're going to have Benny do one more tune here. Hopefully Facebook will improve. Tavio, never tell me the odds. Hey, Heather. Evening, Grandma Bell. Hey, Mary. Welcome, everybody. Once again, if Facebook is giving you trouble, try youtube.com/Adam Selzer. We're broadcasting there as well. I'm going to let Benny Goodman do one more tune, then we'll get started properly. Hey, Janice in Eastern Iowa. I'll be in Davenport in a couple months myself. Benny finish this one up, then we'll start up properly. And welcome along, everybody. All right, sounds like Facebook's being kind of a mess tonight. Too bad I tried the YouTube feed. Heather, no, I'm not planning on doing St. Louis. I'm doing 6 shows in this tour, at least. Hey, Felicita. Believe it or not, I know what I'm doing for Find a Grave tomorrow, but I may have to bring a broom. Find a Grave's tough when there's snow. All right, Benny Goodman is wrapping it up. That means it's time for us to go ahead and get started here. Benny Goodman is coming to you live from the Joseph Urban Room in the Congress Hotel in downtown Chicago in 1936. Hey, all right, let's get going here. All right, welcome along, everybody. I'm Adam Selzer for Mysterious Chicago Tours. I've been a tour guide and historian here in Chicago for 20 years now. I've got about a dozen Chicago history books out, including Mysterious Chicago, the book. There it is. H.H. Holmes, The True History of the White City Double, Murder Maps USA, Graceland Cemetery, Chicago Stories, Symbols, and Secrets, and of course, the new one, Graveyards of Trinity Church in St. Paul's. This is my first New York history book. Came out just about a month ago. I've had almost zero feedback about it. That's what happens when they put a book out in January. Maybe when tourist season starts up, things will start to pick up a little bit. Anyway, also on the History Channel and the Travel Channel all the time, so I am, after all, incredibly famous. You should definitely pay attention to everything that I say, especially since I'm talking about con artists today. Now, we're going to be talking about historical gamblers, swindlers, and con artists who operated in Chicago, primarily in the 19th century, but on into the 20th century. And a lot of these tricks are still being played today. Some of the specifics have changed, but the same cons that used to work back then still work now. And of course, gambling. As Dylan once wrote, you stand in the marble lobby of an opulent hotel with neon flashing while being served free drinks by 1,000 pretty women wearing sequin leotards, flirting for tips in a bright light city full of pawn shops and suicides, and you still think you're going to win. Well, all right, we're going to start just a little bit about one of Chicago's most notable con artists, one of our most famous ones, which was a guy who, in the 1940s, came here to the Chicago Times building. This one with the 2 columns in front of it. This is an old Holabird and Root building. It was the Chicago Times then it later became the Sun-Times. But Yellow Kid came into this building once to give a talk about the history of his life back in 1940. Came again in 1956 to meet with Saul Bellow. Now, Yellow Kid was a famous con artist. In the 1940s, he had a whole autobiography out, co-written with a ghostwriter, of course. There's pictures of him from going way back, all the way. He was one of America's most famous con artists, which you would think would be a bad thing to be if you were a con artist, because you kind of wanted to work on anonymity. If you know the guy's talking to you as a con artist, probably hurts him. In Yellow Kid's case, it kind of didn't. Now, he was named the Yellow Kid after a newspaper comic strip. Exactly when he was given that nickname depended on when he was telling the story. Now, usually it's said that he got the nickname from Hinky Dink Kenna, the first ward alderman. But other times when he told the story, he said that he got it from Bathhouse John, the other first ward alderman. But one thing he was fairly consistent about was saying that he got his start working for traveling medicine shows. Not the specific one, but guys very much like this, who would go around doing scam number one of the evening, the Old Time Medicine Show. These were places that would go from town to town, often with music and comedy skits, trying to sell, a couple bottles of Dr. Goods or Monarch Remedies, or literally one called Snake Oil that you could buy. Clark Stanley's Snake Oil Liniment. Hamlin's Wizard Oil was a big one. Now, his job was often being that guy in the crowd saying, "Sir, you don't know me, but I bought a bottle of this last year. It cured everything that ailed me, and I'm back to buy 10 more bottles." This would induce the other people in the crowd to think, wow, that guy's a stranger who's never met him before, except the one time that he bought a bottle from him. This stuff must really work. Very classic scam. But he said that he was traveling around with a guy by the name of Doc Merriweather, who was selling a tapeworm remedy. Now, one thing you hear about every now and then is back in the late 19th and early 20th century, people would swallow tapeworm eggs as a way of losing weight. The tapeworm would eat all the food that was coming down. How common this actually was, you can read a lot of back and forth as to whether it was real or not, but people did get worried that they might have accidentally eaten a tapeworm. Doc Merriweather would go around and tell everybody, yes, that's what's happened. You have eaten a tapeworm. You got stomach trouble? Do you suffer from nausea? You have a tapeworm. Now, he must have been very persuasive just to get people to gather around and start worrying that, hey, what if I do have a tapeworm? Sometimes I do get nauseous. Sometimes I am really hungry. Maybe this is the problem the whole time. So Doc Merriweather, again, not pictured here, but this kind of thing, would convince people, you, sir, have a tapeworm. All you need to do is take some of my medicine. Now, the medicine that he was selling was a mixture of camphor and household chemicals and laxatives. So he would bring these people up and say, here, I do believe you have a tapeworm, just drink some of this, and then step behind this curtain. So they would drink some of it, step behind the curtain, and poop into a chamber pot. Now, this is where you have to imagine Doc Merriweather must have been a really good performer. If half of the crowd he had gathered didn't leave when the guy stepped behind the corner to take a dump, that had to be a really good crowd. But meanwhile, Yellow Kid would be hiding back behind the place, ready to switch out the poop bucket with a different poop bucket that had a potato peel in it that looked like a tapeworm. So this is one of the earliest cons that he worked on. The old poop bucket switcheroo. Now, I'm assuming he wasn't just swapping out the poop bucket for another one that only had a potato peel in it. He might have actually had the job of being the bucket pooper to begin with. But he would come out and take out the other one, use some tongs to pull out the potato peel, and say, there's your tapeworm, sir. Evil looking thing, isn't it? And it would have been stuck with you if you didn't take my medicine. So here's the thing. The Yellow Kid tells this story in places like the old Sun-Times buildings just so well that the story of Doc Merriweather's miracle elixir comes up on lists on like Cracked.com of the greatest scam medicines, and Doc Merriweather is the greatest con artist, and like in the top 10 over and over. But here's the thing. Other than the Yellow Kid's autobiography, I'm not sure there's a single bit of evidence that Doc Merriweather was ever even a real person. He's probably a composite character, or just somebody that Yellow Kid made up altogether. And so, he is still swindling us after all this time. And we're going to cover a couple of the other cons that he worked on. The movie The Sting was largely based on his autobiography. But first, we're going to go back a little bit further in history to one of Chicago's earliest con men, who used to operate here on Lake Street. What is perhaps best remembered now for a memorial boulder to him in the Old City Cemetery, which is now Lincoln Park, is a guy by the name of David Kennison. Now, when David Kennison died in 1852, he told everybody that he was the last survivor of the Boston Tea Party and that he was about 115 years old. In 1848, at the time he was 112, or about to be, he took out an ad in the paper saying, "I have taken out the museum in the city," this would have been on Lake Street, "which I was obliged to do in order to get a comfortable living, as my pension is so small that it scarcely affords the comforts of life. If I live until the 17th of November, 1848, I shall be 112 years old, and I intend making a donation party on that day at the museum. I have fought in several battles for my country. Now all I can ask of this generous public is to call at the museum on the 17th day of November, which is my birthday, and donate to me all they think I deserve. I shall be happy to have all the traveling community call and see me at all times." Incidentally, my Venmo and PayPal are down below if you want to talk about donation parties. Now, one of his neighbors and friends was a guy named Fernando Jones, the founder of the Chicago Title Company. Really, anytime Fernando Jones turns up in a history story, you got to take everything else with a grain of salt. In any case, Mr. Kennison was pulling a scam that we would now call the classic stolen valor routine. Now, he was a veteran of the War of 1812, but the odds that he actually fought in the Revolutionary War seem to be fairly thin, and certainly he almost definitely was not at the Boston Tea Party. I don't think there's a single historian left who believes that. Incidentally, they would not have called it stolen valor at the time. That term almost didn't exist up until the late 1990s when a book about Vietnam veteran frauds came out. This book of that name, Stolen Valor. But here's the other thing about Kennison. In addition to hitting people up for money, he also used his position to make speeches about slavery. He would stand up and say that when I fought to free this country, I wasn't only fighting for the white men. Make your country free and abolish slavery. So this guy may in fact have been a con artist, but at least he was using his powers for good. And frankly, it's hard for me to believe that anybody really believed that this guy was 110, 112, 115 years old. Certainly in his pension record, he mentioned how scarce his pension was. It's partly because they didn't give him a Revolutionary War pension. There's this note in his pension file saying not to listen to a word he says. It notes here that in 1814, when he joined the Army, he was 42. Then in 1818, he swore his age was 56. 1820, he was 79. So over the course of 6 years, he managed to age 27 years, which is a really neat trick. But of course, this is a con. We're also going to be talking about gamblers today. We're going to go back to 1866, when it's difficult to overstate just what a big deal gambling was in the United States. Now, in the 1860s, one of the biggest guys was a guy by the name of George Trussell. This is a picture from a book about him. He was said to be one of the most picturesque characters in the profession at a time when the profession reached the height of picturesqueness. He operated in a place on what is now Randolph Street, right about here, Randolph and Dearborn, that area, in the pre-fire days when it was known as Hair Trigger Block. Now, Hair Trigger Block had a lot of our earlier cons, like the shell game, which is a variation of 3-card monte. You know, you move the shells around. You know, anybody's a winner. Anybody's a winner. 3 seashells. Your Sylvester Stallone will say you can wipe your butt with them. But he was running gambling dens and poker games, but also dating a woman by the name of Molly. Molly was probably pretty young when they started dating, but they went all the way up through her adulthood, ended up being the subject of a whole biography, The Queen of the Demimonde. Demimonde being another name for, like, the underworld, really. So here's a drawing of her from her biography. She found out that George was doing her wrong. So one day she went to Seneca Wright's saloon, where a clown was singing a song called The Limerick Races, walked into the place and shot him. He stumbled out back to the alley. So this alley right here, now the one behind the Iroquois Theater, that is sometimes referred to as the Alley of Death and Mutilation. It's usually said to be haunted by all the ghosts of the Iroquois Theater fire of 1903, but there's no reason that it might not be George, too. When I was running ghost tours out in this alley, now and then, if things were slow, I would bring up the possibility that George could be haunting the place. Now, Molly was convicted of murder, but then pardoned after about a month, and continued to show up back in town giving interviews every now and then for quite a long time. But she's one of the many famous ones of the era. There was also a guy at the same time who was a big rival of George Trussell named Cap Hyman. It's said that Cap Hyman would have been the biggest killer in town if he could shoot straight, but he couldn't. He was dating a woman by the name of Molly Holbrook, first he was dating Gentle Annie Stafford. Gentle Annie Stafford and he got married with him, like at gunpoint apparently, and started their own place, a resort way up on the north side called Sunnyside. The street Sunnyside Avenue led right to this. That's why we call it Sunnyside Avenue to this day, even though the place was really kind of a mess. Now, one of the people who hung around here was a guy by the name of Buck Holbrook. Another one, his unmarked grave is up over here. Now, he was married to a woman by the name of Molly Holbrook, who went on to become one of the most noted pickpockets anywhere. She used to fight with Gentle Annie Stafford all the time. At one point, they got in a really nasty fight and landed both of them in a lockup awaiting trial. Probably would have both gone to jail. But then the place got wrecked in the Great Chicago Fire. Later on, Gentle Annie's place was taken over by a woman named Emma Hedges, who had previously run a place where the women had names like Miss Nobody and Kate Nunsuch. At the time, in the 1860s, a great many of the gambling parlors were also houses of ill repute. Gangsters had great names. We hear like Toothpick Ben, Stovepipe Ben, Appetite Bill, Jumping Sam, Nobby Tom, Snappy Johnny, Cracker Jack. I haven't even gotten to the problematic ones. Among the more famous was a guy by the name of Dirty Shirt Brown, who was said to be as slovenly in appearance as he was loose in morals. He dealt mostly at Faro, a card game that was popular at the time. One time the police broke in on the place and arrested him as a Faro dealer, but he was really mad because he wasn't actually dealing at the time they broke in. He was between games. He said, "I never kick when I'm guilty, but always settle up like a gentleman. I don't think it's a square deal to arrest a man for doing nothing. I never squeal, but when I don't happen to be at work, I think a man has a right to kick just a little." In 1873, he even shot at some cops who tried to break up a Faro game. By 1882, he was running a place on East Madison. Arrested, and a friend said, "Oh, don't find poor Dirty Shirt. He has a wife and kids, and he's an old man. Just find me twice and let him go back to Ohio." And they ended up finding the guy twice, and him too. But they find the friend more. So clerk said all that dirt money must own property someplace. Emery A. Storr, his lawyer, moved that Dirty Shirt be washed before he was sentenced. Probably went back to Ohio, but nobody knows whatever became of him in the end. It's a little bit difficult to research because there were a number of people named Dirty Shirt Brown at the time. There was also a Dirty Shirt Daniels, who was a notable orator in Iowa, who said he had to leave Iowa because they were moving towards prohibition and universalism and the end of capital punishment, and he did not want to live in a state that didn't have whiskey, hell, and hangings. So this is a bit of Dearborn right below Madison Street, or right above Madison Street. This is the entrance to what was called Gambler's Alley. We'll spin down it here briefly. This is what it looks like now. This used to be a whole alley full of nothing but gambling places. All through the 1860s, well into the 1870s and 1880s. Initially, it was known as a place full of, guys dressed in silk. Very high-class gamblers. They were especially into bucket shops here. That was a place where you could take bets on commodities of the Board of Trade. So right at the corner there, right below, was Billy Boyle's restaurant, the chop house that was said to really introduce people to the fine way of eating steak. It was a popular hangout for people like Mayor Carter Harrison, famous lawyers like A.S. Trude and Emery Storrs, publishers like Eugene Field and Melville Stone, detectives like Billy Pinkerton, actors like Edwin Booth. But it was also right at the entrance of Gambler's Alley and absolutely loaded with gamblers at all times. Now, the Chicago Evening Daily Telegraph was really into talking about Gambler's Alley. A lot of neighborhood newspapers had their pet neighborhoods that they would rag on. The Inner Ocean talked about the Black Hole, which was a couple of blocks south of here, and had, according to them, so many whiskey bars that it's hard to imagine where they would have even been able to fit a stool. But day after day, the Daily Telegraph would write about Gambler's Alley and the latest infernal swindles of that delectable thoroughfare. Eventually, even their fans wrote and said, "I think you had better give us a rest about Gambler's Alley." And they wrote and said, "Well, you must have won, huh?" Now, one place inside here, this is 11 Calhoun, and I feel like I would be betting a lot in this place, because I would just find out what the guy from Lucky Charms here was betting on, and assuming that that was going to be a winner. Like, there will be death, there will be taxes, and whatever the guy from Lucky Charms is betting on is going to be a winner. One of the other notable places there was Billy the Clock's place. This is a guy who was sometimes known as Billy the Clock or Billy the Clock Man. He had invented some kind of clock-like device that would spit out things like grains up 1/4 or wheat up 1/2. Little possible outcomes for the commodities market, and people had a way of betting on it. This wasn't connected to anything. It was all just random cards. So really it was just like playing a stock market game, but betting on it. He was in and out of jail for it, or in and out of court all the time. I could not find a picture of his clock, even though people were talking about it for decades. There's also, this is the inside of a place called Appetite Bill's. Appetite Bill was another of our major gangsters of the era, who also ran what was called a Peter Funk shop, which is another word. Peter Funk was another word for a scam in those days. It was where you would buy like stuffed watches and bogus jewelry. Appetite Bill was so well known, he eventually ran for office in Seattle. But all the way down here, they were just ripping off every rube they could. Initially, it was known as place for people who were all dressed in silks. Gradually, it just got to be what they called the old story. Do country residents never read the papers, or is their bump of credulity abnormally developed? Two confidence games successfully played. One guy who operated out of here, kind of a counterpart, I would say, to Appetite Bill, was Hungry Joe, who was once seen along with Double Dirty Collar Joe at Appetite Bill's saloons down in the corner. Hungry Joe ended up having a whole autobiography written. He was a very famous bunco man. Bunco was like a game played often with loaded dice. Most famously, he swindled Oscar Wilde when he was in New York. He came upon Wilde on the street, and they brought him in and played this very classic con game where they let him win a few games. Got his confidence up, got him thinking that he had a system. Then got him all the way up and said, "Hey, now you should really bet a lot. Now, don't bet with that, like bet more than that. Just write a check or something." So Oscar wrote an enormous check, promptly lost, the game having been rigged the entire time, and bunco dice games were so frequently rigged that they just kind of fell out of favor because everybody thought they were all fake. And most of them probably were. This is a contender for where the phrase bunk comes from, but like a lot of those, like, where do we get the phrase stuff, there's a lot of other operations as well. But Oscar was smart enough to stop payment on the check, but Hungry Joe, to save face, said he still managed to get $1,500 out of him. But all of this is really just a prelude to the guy who really took things to the next level. A guy by the name of Mike McDonald. Now, right about here was a place called the Richmond House. This was right across from Michigan Avenue and right across from the train station at the time, so all the country rubes coming off were right there, ripe for the pickings. It was also a popular place for Confederate spies, which Mike McDonald himself may have been involved in, though we don't really know. But Mike McDonald started out operating gambling rooms out of the Richmond Hotel back in the 1860s. Previously, he had gotten his start as what was called a candy butcher. He would walk around on train cars selling candy boxes. But also, he had rigged it up so, hey, there's a prize in every box. It could be as low as 1 cent or as much as $5. And people would buy a whole lot of candy boxes thinking they might get the $5 prize. If there actually was a $5 prize in any of them, who knows? Most of them was under 3 cents. So he was making an awful lot of money selling these candy boxes. This, of course, is a variation of the famous soap prize scam. This is where a guy would show up with a bunch of bars of soap and say, wrapped up with each of these is a prize. One of them has got a $100 bill. And as bar after bar sold and nobody found a $100 bill, people would start bidding for paying a whole lot more than the soap was actually worth, until finally the people would be spending like $50 because they were sure that this must be the one. And then the last person buying it would be one of his Confederates who had been waiting around the whole time. So eventually Mike McDonald moved away from this and decided not to focus quite as much on the country rubes, but also to have a place of his own called the store. You could just say, hey, I'm just going to the store. Similar tricks are done in college towns where there's very frequently a bar called the library. So it's hard to get a really good picture of the outside of this place, but it was a 4-story gambling emporium, and he had a whole bunch of people working to steer people towards it. Bunco steerers, they were called. Appetite Bill worked for him off and on. Billy the Clock worked for him off and on. We do have a drawing of the inside of the place from the National Police Gazette. Now, eventually, after a certain amount of time, he became so powerful and rich and controlled so many gamblers around the city, and gambling was such a big thing in the city, that his word and his influence could influence mayoral elections. There were a couple of people in the 1870s that he managed to get elected, and after that, he effectively owned the town. Here he is stepping off of a ladder. Like, at one point when they built the new criminal court building, the one on the site of the current criminal court building, he brought in a guy named Henry Holland. He was a friend of Mike McDonald. This is how it looked at the time. And said, we need to have this courthouse treated. So he arranged for him to get paid. There was a group in 1887 they called the Boodle Board. It was a whole board of commissioners that was all on the take. They agreed to pay his friend Henry Holland $40,000 to have this stone treated with some kind of invention he had come up with. He ended up charging them $137,000. Now, the later board wouldn't pay. It took them like 20 years until they actually settled. And at the trial, William LeBaron Jenney said he may have been he'd certainly overcharged, but they agreed to it. And William LeBaron Jenney, the architect, tried out the material that he was using and found it was really just watered down paint all along. But this continued to be a popular pastime. But McDonald's influence was so big that he was able to dictate who everybody hired, who everybody fired, where all of the money in the city went, and people got to know that the city was the tiger's prey. Shall Mike McDonald rule this county as well as this city? He was married a couple of times. First was to a woman named Mary who shot a policeman one time at the store. Then went on a grand tour, and Mike was so suspicious he sent along a priest with her, and she ended up leaving him for the priest. He then married a woman named Dora Feldman, a Jewish woman, may have even converted for her. But then she fell in love with a teenager. She was about 30, he was 15, an artist. And this ended up being in a very long trial after she eventually shot him to death. And in the middle of the trial, Mike himself died of what some said was a broken heart. So, gambling maniacs who take over the seats of government do eventually croak. We found him at Mount Olivet, down on one of our Find a Grave days. It was really during his time that it's kind of amazing that he wasn't able to do anything about the other swindlers, such as Cap Streeter. It's kind of a shaky video. But one thing you do notice that we do kind of get fond of our swindlers and con artists here in Chicago. I was just listening to an old Gene Shepard radio show where he talked about the man my father admired most, the guy who he thought was just, this is a great American. It was the Yellow Kid. But right here at Grand and McClurg, spinning. I should get better footage of this. That doesn't even make me dizzy. Is a statue of Captain George Wellington Streeter. Now, Captain Streeter, at least according to his version of the story, crashed his houseboat onto the shore back in 1888 and started charging people money to dump their garbage around his ship until eventually he created a 187-acre landfill. And it then took the cops 30 years to get rid of the guy. He decided that not only was it his own land, it was his own country. And they tried everything they could to get rid of him, but he had a whole army of hobos that he had allowed to move in here, and also had forged enough signatures that he was able to drag things out in court for a long time. At one point, they evicted him from the land, so he just mounted his boat up on a truck and turned it into an automobile mobile home. It might have been the first automobile mobile home ever, and just parked it. It's hard to believe this, but there were no parking regulations on Michigan Avenue in those days, what is now Michigan Avenue. And this guy dragged this out for about 30 years. He just parked there entirely legally. They couldn't make him leave at the time. There were no parking. Automobiles were still too new. There wasn't really rules about where you could park and where you couldn't. His funeral eventually was a major affair, as they conveyed him with what they called his helmet, his plug hat, up to a small grave in Graceland Cemetery. We could probably fudge some of the maps of Lake Illinois, right? There he is. Excellent portraits of this guy. The statue really did get things right. Of course, 1893, Chicago hosted a World's Fair. This brought in something like 27 million paid admissions. A lot of these were people from very small towns who had never been anywhere before, and were very easy marks for con artists. One of the most famous guys operating at the time, and who knew that thieves, every thief in town was going to be here. They had to really bring out the real pros. The cops jacked up the prices they were charging to keep pickpockets out of trouble. But one of them was a guy by the name of Tom O'Brien, who reputedly was the guy who invented a con called the Gold Brick Con. I very much doubt he was the inventor. Variations on this have been going around forever, but he was certainly known as a very successful practitioner. This was a con where you take a plain old brick, coat it with about 3 layers of gold leaf, and sell it to somebody as a fully gold brick. You would tell them something like, listen, I'm in big financial trouble. This gold brick is worth $10,000, but I can sell it to you for $50. That's how badly I need $50. And a good enough con artist could actually make this sort of thing work. Now, eventually he killed one of his partners in a Paris hotel in 1895. He was spared the guillotine by having his girlfriend hire a lawyer who was able to show that it was second-degree murder, not first. Would have died by the guillotine otherwise. Instead, he died in prison on Devil's Island. Which brings us to another con artist who said that in 1893, those days were the wildest things you ever saw happened in Chicago in 1893. No, you can't batch it for debauchery. A woman by the name of Chicago May, officially known as May Sharp at the time, said that she was a widow at 15, alone in Chicago. If I had a baby, or if I could have returned to my people, the chances are I would have gone straight. Such not being the case, however, I nursed my sorrow and brooded over revenge. It never occurred to me to look for honest employment. That's Chicago May, pictured here later in life. She even was famous enough to have an autobiography out in the 1920s. Now, I very much doubt the autobiography is reliable, but it is a really interesting read. On the Patreon, I posted about her several months ago, and her autobiography is included in one of the deep research posts. Now, incidentally, she also talked about seeing the ghost of George Trussell, the gambler. She talked about drinking in the very room where he was killed, and said the skunk was hopped off. The glamour of the murder hung over the room where George the gambler was carried to. It was haunted. Didn't George's ghost used to walk in that room at certain hours of the night, wearing a hat for which he was noted in life, a big overcoat and a Van Dyke beard? Well, the place where he was shot burned down in the Great Chicago Fire, so I don't know, but I would look for him more in the alley myself. But she was involved in a scam that was known as badgering. This involved pretending to be a sex worker. She would get in carriages with guys and start nuzzling up to them, and then with her teeth, she would grab their diamond scarf pin and steal it. This was one of many ways that people, either sex workers or people just pretending to be sex workers long enough to get the money, were able to make an awful lot of cash. Badgering was what she called it. But she eventually ended up dating a guy by the name of Eddie Guerin. They went to Paris and robbed the American Express Company. Eddie was sent to Devil's Island and actually escaped it. The French assumed that he had died in the attempt. So when he got to the U.S., he knew he was home free because he said the French are far too polite ever to arrest a dead man. But one of a couple of ways that you could pull scams on people who had hired you as a sex worker. Another was the old Mickey Finn, slip 'em a Mickey. This was named after a bartender named Mickey Finn who ran a place called the Lone Star Saloon here in Chicago, where he was at least accused of making knockout powders that would knock people unconscious so that they could be stolen from. He vehemently denied that this was the case and was probably telling the truth. It looks very much like a case to me as somebody was trying to get a hold of his property. He rightly pointed out, look at my clientele here at the Lone Star Saloon. It would cost me more money to make these knockout powders than I could ever make robbing the kind of person who comes into this joint. But in any case, the name stuck, whether he liked it or not. There was also the panel room. A panel room was a brothel that was filled with hidden rooms and secret passages. So once a person was knocked out, somebody else could slip in, or once somebody was otherwise engaged and distracted, somebody else could slip in and steal all of their stuff. Now, there were a number of places like this, and pretty soon all of the gambling dens were operating with things like secret passages and tunnels. For instance, you got Big Jim O'Leary was a gambling king. He was the son of Mrs. O'Leary of Great Chicago Fire fame, and had a place on Halstead that was diagrammed here. There were hidden rooms, there were hidden compartments, there were hidden elevator shafts, everything all over the place. And in 1917, you had the Burr Oak Inn down in what is now the Beverly area, which was a combination cabaret slash saloon slash gambling parlor slash brothel, with tunnels leading out to the garage and hidden passages all over the place, all lorded over by a guy named Sam the Kinky Jew Harris. His picture seems to have disappeared on me here. They called him the Kinky Jew because of his hair. If he was the other kind of kinky, he might have lived longer. He died trying to rappel out of the criminal court building on some twine. A person who was the other kind of kinky might have been better with rope safety. But another person running this same con used to hang out at the Marquette building. Seen over here on the right, this is the Federal Plaza that is now on the list of buildings that Elon and his greasy Beavis bros think they can just sell off. The Marquette building by Hullibert and Roche was home of the offices of a woman named Gladys the Green. In the early 20th century, when automobiles were still pretty novel, she would kind of advertise herself by renting a fully green one, dressing all in green. It was all grand and it was all green. She would drive around town, and this made the news. People were fixated on her verdigris. But what she was really doing was then she would come up to guys, rich people from out of town in the hotels, and say, yes, I'm that green girl you've been hearing about, and you're really cute. And she would seduce them and then blackmail them. Now, around this same time, this is Mr. Yerkes, who was trying to get complete run over all of the streetcar tracks. And when Carter Harrison was opposing him at running for mayor again, he bought up the Chicago Daily Inter-Ocean and had them accuse them of, literally the exact phrase was that he had imported gypsies, tramps, and thieves. A whole Cher song worth of undesirables. Or 3 people you'd like to have dinner with. And for days they would put out these lists of all the people who were working in it, which was mostly made-up gambler nicknames. Sly Teddy, Ugly Pat, Charles Lute, the King of the Pickpockets, 7-Up Jim, 16 Mule Pete, Butch McGrath, Tommy the Clock. I wonder if they were mistaking him for Billy the Clock. Knockout Dunn, last name unknown, Sassy Bill. Most of these guys had never been in papers before and never would again, but it's difficult to avoid talking about this when we come up to them. We're going to move up to around the same time, 1904. Somebody hired Auto 78 at Dan Canary's garage in the old auditorium building and had it driven out to Lamont, where he shot the chauffeur to death. Now, Mr. Dove, the person who had rented the car, was never identified. For a while, it was suspected that it was Yellow Kid. The detectives declared Joseph Weil, confidence man, accustomed to using autos, and enters Dove's description. This actually comes up in his autobiography. The doorman at the Congress Hotel across the street had identified a picture of the Yellow Kid and said, that's the guy, that's Mr. Dove, I saw Mr. Dove. But meanwhile, Yellow Kid, being in trouble, just went there with his lawyer, walked up to the doorman and said, have you ever seen this guy? The doorman said, no, I don't recognize him. Like, you're going to tell that to the police as well. This is a thing in his autobiography that actually turned out to line up with the known facts. But really, by this time, the early 20th century, Yellow Kid's big thing to do was horse races. But what he would do, really, is he would find people who seemed like appropriate rubes, but not too big a rubes. He wanted people with more money. He always said that he had never swindled an honest man. And he would come up to people, make friends with them, and say, so, I happen to know this next race is going to be fixed. There's going to be a lot of money in it. But don't bet that much money at the table. Go to my betting agent. He's this guy over here. Place a very large bet with him, because I know this race is going to be fixed. This is known as the old fixed race scam. It's not a matter of actually fixing a race, it's convincing people that the race is going to be fixed. Now, there was a point when the guy ended up losing all the money and taking Yellow Kid to court over this, but he had to be let go because it's not illegal not to fix a horse race. I know I've said this before, but this is one of the great lessons of Mysterious Chicago. It's not illegal not to fix a horse race. And by this time, he was hanging out in places like Redpath's Saloon, which was down around the bend here on the right in Pickwick Place. We'll bend around here a bit. There were several Redpath saloons, but they were always dens of gamblers and con artists. He also hung out at a place called Butterley's Buffet, which was up over here by the Green Mill. And it would have been up around here that he came up with what was maybe the most famous one now, the Wire Room Con. This is where he would convince people, listen, we have a secret. There's all these gambling parlors around here where you bet on horse races and they wait till they get the telegraphs that come in about the results. That telegraph first goes to the Board of Trade. Now we're going to show the current Board of Trade. It would have been just to the left of this. But I happen to know a guy who works in the Board of Trade. We're going to come up with a thing where he gives us the results a little bit before it comes in down below. So we're going to be getting a phone call. We'll know what the actual results are. You can quick make a bet, and you can make all the money you want. And they let him win a couple of times like this, and then get him to make a huge, huge bet, and then they have the horse come in like second or something. No, you were supposed to say to place, not to win. This would have been in the old Board of Trade. But this ended up, if you think about it, it's really just a variation on the old Bunko Con. Meanwhile, on State Street, was Professor Ryan. Now, Professor Ryan, as pictured here, was a psychic, but he didn't dress like in robes or anything. He dressed just like this and ran something like 600 seances a week. People would come in and he would just dress in a suit like they were going to a doctor, and he would explain the stars and what he was getting from the spirits, just like a normal guy, as though it was the most normal thing in the world. And he made plenty of money at this, but really the whole thing was to identify victims of much bigger scams. Old women who were looking for what to do with all this money they had just inherited. And he got away with this for a really long time because, like all of the other psychics operating in the city and all of the pickpockets and everybody else, they were all involved in a trust where they were paying the police. In fact, he was paying the police something like $400 a month for protection. Pickpockets paid a little bit more than that. Most of this was all done through a guy by the name of Barney Birch, who had been a pickpocket himself back during the days of the World's Fair. By the 1930s, he was like an elder statesman working with the Bugs Moran gang, kind of one of our great forgotten gangsters, but he even had like a vaudeville routine where he told a story of his life as a gangster. As at one point during the Ryan trial, when it became apparent that he was going to rat on the police, they tried to shoot him to death on Randolph Street, right about where Seneca Wright's saloon would have been where George Trussell was killed back in 1866. We'll move on to one last one here. I'm a little over time now. So one more bit on... let's go back a little anyway. This is the Majestic Theater building, one of the earliest places known to have operated a Ponzi scheme. That wasn't the theater itself. It was a guy operating inside of it by the name of Leo Koretz, who was selling land in what he called the Bayona River Syndicate. He was selling land in South America that he said was rich with oil and told everybody that they were going to make a fortune. It was going to absolutely double the size of their estate in no time at all. People were begging him to sell this land. Really, the land was not only not rich in oil, he didn't actually own the land to sell to begin with. So he was using all of the money that he bought from other investors to pay off the first investors, making them think more and more was coming, but really just amassing himself a fortune, millions of dollars, that wasn't really going to make anybody anything and wasn't really his to sell. So this became a big exposure. It got to be, it eventually became part of a book called Empire of Deception by Dean Job. And he ended up dying by eating a box of candy. He was diabetic. But another way that you can make money on selling worthless land was something that the Yellow Kid came up with. He found out about some land in Michigan that was basically worthless and selling for something like $1 an acre. So he bought several acres of this, something like 1,000 acres of basically valueless land, and divided it up into parcels. And when he would find a sucker, a new victim, he would say, you seem like the kind of guy I'd like to have as a neighbor. I'd like to give you this plot of land in a new vacation subdivision up in Michigan. Here's a beautiful painting of it. And they're going to be like, well, I'm not really just going to buy any land. And you'll go, buy it? Nothing. I'm giving this to you for free. No catch at all. But of course, you're going to want to go get an abstract drawn up and have the title transferred. Here's my agent that you can do that through. And these abstracts and titles were actually legit. It was for very much worthless land, but he gave it out for free, but made about $25 to $50 by having the abstract and title drawn up. So he was making about $25 to $50 per parcel on land that had cost him $1 an acre. It was more or less legal, at least at the time. When there aren't any regulations or a Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, you can get away with an awful lot. But he got away with an awful lot and lived to a ripe old age. This is him around his 100th birthday in the mid-1970s. Now, he was living by that time up in Rogers Park in a nursing home. He'd said he had reformed in about the 1940s. But it was right up in here on Sheridan, still standing. This is where he lived out the last years of his life. Now, the year of his death, his co-writer on the autobiography tried to sue the makers of The Sting, because they had clearly picked stuff up out of his book. Now, he himself had a plot at Rose Hill Cemetery purchased, but for some reason, Rose Hill, the management at the time, just didn't want him interred there. I believe his wife and kids are still there, but I've never been able to determine for sure. He himself was eventually buried in what I believe is an unmarked grave down at Archerwood Cemetery. And just to put a capper on this, one of the places he was going back in the 1910s, 1920s was right across the street from Bughouse Square, down Tooker Place Alley. The alley right across over here. Hey, there's my old car. But down in Tooker Place Alley was the Dill Pickle Club, where they would have lectures on something like the physiology of the insignificance of flappers and cake eaters with Dr. Ben Reitman. Joseph Wilde himself would give speeches here. There was a place where people would, whoever was a nut about something would be hired to give speeches. Sometimes he would give demonstrations about how to be a con artist, which he would literally demonstrate by taking the audience for $10. There's a great piece where one time he said he and a friend would bring in this device that he said would instantly make roasted chicken. And they would put a raw chicken in it, then close the lid, and do something probably very similar magic-wise to the old poop bucket switcheroo, and a minute later out would come a fully roasted chicken. And they assumed it was so corny that everybody knew it was just a magic trick, but people would offer a lot of money to buy the thing. Captain Streeter showed up there one time too. They said he covered everything but the ethical code of the dinosaurs talking in there. But there's one other newspaper headline that I just can't, I have to end on this because there's nothing better to end with and I can't possibly top it. Yellow Kid always claimed that he never swindled anybody who wasn't honest, never swindled anybody who seemed like too easy of a mark. He always had carefully selected victims. So the police even admitted, yellow kid ignores boobs. But all right, everybody, that was Swindlers, Gamblers, and Con Artists in Chicago History. I'm Adam from Mysterious Chicago Tours. If you have enjoyed the night's lecture, hit me up. Join the Patreon. We've covered a lot of these people in great depth on the Patreon. You get up to 4 posts a week. There's a Chicago history story every Monday. Then the next tier, you get like many articles on them in some cases. On Thursdays, coyote pictures in cemeteries. Every Wednesday, Friday is serial killer day. Lots and lots of good stuff. There's even you can even get on a free ticket tour tier for less than the cost of a ticket for one of the walking tours. They're coming back up shortly. Or you can just hit me up on my Venmo, hit me up on my PayPal. Things that help us keep the lights on. I'm fairly sure some of my my usual school groups are not going to be able to make the trips anymore, even though their funding is chopped off. So thanks everybody once again for joining me. Oh, look at this video that's still in the deck. Remember when Charlotte used to get in the liquor cabinet? Fun times. I miss Charlotte. But all right, she was the smartest of the cats that we've ever had, I think. But all right, thanks everybody. I'm Adam from Mysterious Chicago Tours. Here's Benny Goodman coming to you live from the Congress Hotel. We'll just hang out like we always do. Glad to be here when you need me, Eleanor. Now, I took a lot out of that tour and I added some new stuff in. It's one of my favorite ones, really. The original one, H.H. Holmes shows up. He was a swindler, but he's got his own tours. Charlotte was so smart. We love Miles, but I don't know how smart he is. Now, Charlotte was probably battling with her own reflection. She was fascinated by her own reflection. Thanks, Amy. Eleanor, there you go. You know, I still haven't seen The Sting 2. There's a Simpsons where Grandpa is teaching him the grift, and he said, now this con was in The Sting Part 2, so nobody knows about it. I can see that. Lily is moderately smart, but she's just so reserved you don't always notice. Priya's pretty smart. Priya's a pretty smart girl. Miles, I've had cats that really weren't smart. Miles isn't one of those. Miles is moderately smart when he feels like it. He seemed very smart when he was a kid. Lemon Drop Kid, I feel like I missed that one. Now, Lily is in fact a food bandit. Very good at waiting until your back is turned. I've seen her run off with hunks of meat bigger than her.
And that would put rhythm in the feet of a wooden Indian. That was the bugle call rag, Benny Goodman's own arrangement. Now, the popular tune, Thanks a Million.
Lily is doing well. With Ronnie out this week. Lily is very attached to Ronnie. She'll mostly like sit on Ronnie's lap all day while Ronnie's working. Yeah, Timothy, I wonder sometimes if Miles' airplane rides and various flopping adventures might have rattled his brain a bit. No, but even then, you would see him just freaking out over like lights on the ceiling. Beyond what you'd expect of a cat. You know, he doesn't steal food. Only one we really have a problem with on that is Lily. I could try to bring Lily in. That's worth a shot. Order chili mac. That sounds good. Chili mac. When are you coming back? And Debbie, Priya has not quite chilled with age yet. She loves to cuddle, and she's gotten a little bit better about staying in place, but not much better. Beauty Indian Otter. Let me see if I can find. I have an idea where Lily is. Okay, Miles is in the bedroom.
Down Harlem Way, they're all trucking. And here's Helen Ward to tell you all about her. Trucking.
Here's Lily. Ooh. She's not loving this. But she's letting it happen. Okay, Lily, okay. A rare Lily sighting for you, everybody. Usually, she knows when I'm broadcasting that Miles is going to be up here. And she kind of keeps her distance from Miles. Yes, all three cats have shown up tonight then. Miles and Lily are both in the bedroom. They'll be in the same room together all the time. Lily, only when there's food out. She's so quiet. Other than mealtime, I would never know she's here, except for the hair all over the place. But I'm honestly kind of surprised you let me carry her across, clear up from the one end of the apartment to the other there. She doesn't normally like to be picked up much. Karen, have a good night.
Benny Goodman presents On the Alamo.
Hey, Doreen. Excellent pun, Chris. Look at the concept of pun. I'm drinking a little bit. I was planning on spending the evening working on polishing this tour up, and then Patty called and asked if I could come do the radio show. So. Kathy, thanks. I'm glad you guys enjoyed the sledding. I'm not too old to sled. Ain't too old to sled. Try not to doom scroll too much. It tell me it was cold. It was cold, and after the second sled down that I filmed, I was like, how am I even gonna walk back to the car? She's so beat. Good night, Doreen. Doreen, it's not Adam Douglas. Horween Leather, that's an interesting tour. 10 a.m. what day?
Eeny, meeny, miny, mo, and we stay right in the urban room of the Congress Hotel in Chicago and dance some more to Benny Goodman and his orchestra and hear Helen Ward sing Eeny, meeny, miny, mo.
Challenge if I had all three juggling balls. I got 3 sets. I can rarely find all 3 of any of them. I'm at 2 for this set right now. Drunk juggling. I'm already drunk. Just lightly toasted. Let it fly away.
Eeny, meeny, miny, mo. It's the saying high and low. Hear it everywhere you go, any time of day. Big Ben rings it, Valley sings it, Wiseman swings it.
Even Mr. Crosby sings it.
Eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Catch the trouble by the toe. If it hollers, let it go, let it fly away.
Megan, I love it. If I have somebody named Goff, I definitely have to ask. Somebody was just telling me they had Bruce Goff's piano roll collection, which were like custom piano rolls, like on a player piano, that were made specifically for how they looked visually, not how they sounded. Hey, Miles. Miles is back, showing us his good side here.
And we'll let the title
Well, Tommy, let's talk. We'll do it as a morning minute tour sometime.
Madhouse.
Yeah, I added this little side table here so I can set the computer there when I'm trying to work at the desk, and Miles won't let me. If I move over to here, sometimes he can hop onto this. Ooh. Tuesday is Layla's lecture. It's also Patty wants me to do a thing in Madison that night. Gee. Rough, I tell you. Oh, it's the 13th. Should be a new episode of School Spirits and more episodes of Cobra Kai. Last one ended with a cliffhanger. There was a karate riot going on. There's pretty much always a karate riot going on in that show. Of course. Of course, I tell ya. And Miles does not like me to work. He likes to get on the desk. And when I'm sitting, he will be hopping up and walking across the keyboard. I wish I could teach him not to walk on keyboards. I can't do it. You don't want Lily stealing your thunder, huh, Miles? That may be the clearest view ever given of Lily on this show. The first time ever wearing a silk shirt on this show, too. But I love this. Wasn't sure where I'd ever wear it, but man, I dug it once I got it. I'm gonna wear it when I take that school group around Nashville.
And here's a short encore portion of Benny Goodman's forthright invitation at the beginning of his program. Let's dance.
Coming up soon, I got a group from Mexico coming up. Go to New York next month. All right, Chris, what do you sing Julius to sleep? I gotta ask this.
We have been presenting the music of Benny Goodman and his orchestra from the Joseph Urban Room of the Congress Hotel.
I probably said that after you already logged off, so I'll try to remember to ask you again in the morning. It's Find a Grave Friday tomorrow morning. All right, thanks everybody for checking in tonight. Through these strange days indeed. Nobody ever told me there'd be days like these. But thanks a lot, everybody, for joining me. I'm Adam from Mysterious Chicago Tours. I'll see you tomorrow morning, 10 a.m., Find a Grave Friday. Until that, everybody, stay safe, stay strong, stay observant, stay vigilant, and stay spooky. Good night, everybody.